You can see this coming. It's inevitable. You can do something about it. You can prosper instead of get annihilated by it. But I'm like, I want this reset to happen. If we don't get this reset, we're going to be like Japan in a coma economy forever. We're going to die. As a country, the whole Western world's going to die. So this is, you don't mess with Mother Nature, from my point of view. You facilitate it. And they're
But they have
Mother
messed
Nature.
so much.
Unbelievable.
And when the reset starts to happen, they will try to prevent it.
Absolutely.
And what really worries me isn't the reset, it's the reset trying to happen, government rushing in to save us,
them reacting.
and then deciding that because all of this stuff is imploding, that they have to share the wealth, that they've got, that we have to go down this road that has never worked. There isn't an example in history of, I mean, if socialism worked, the Soviet Union would have been the winner in the Cold War.
China is still a top-down driven economy, government planning, which is proved not to work. And I've been telling people, you talk about a bubble. We're nowhere compared to China.
Right.
China is the greatest bubble, the most government-pushed, manipulated, leveraged bubble in all of modern history. China is not going to see a soft landing. They're going to fall like an elephant. And I think we're going to have some civil unrest and a lot of problems here. But I tell you, you couldn't get me in China for $1 billion. They are really going to have problems. And this is what happens when governments mess with Mother Nature, mess with natural cycles. You can facilitate them, but you can't manipulate them and try to prevent them.
The forces of the market are just that. They are forces. They are like the wind and the tides. If you want to try to ignore them, you ignore them at your peril. If you find a way of ordering your life, which harnesses these forces to the benefit of your society, that's the way to go.
Chicago has always been an exceptional place, out of the mainstream. Chicago is geographically isolated. This affects Chicago's intellectual influence in many more areas than economics.
The University of Chicago's intellectual influence would grow. 8 professors and another 11 economists from Chicago went on to win Nobel Prizes. Gary Becker is one of them.
When I came as a graduate student to Chicago in 1951, I was flabbergasted by how stimulating the atmosphere was. I had been a very good student at Princeton. My first day in Friedman's class, he raised a question, I answered. He said, "That's no answer, that's just rephrasing the question." That was the example of how blunt people were.
Nobody was very polite. And people were interested in ideas and argument, and not in making sure you didn't ruffle anybody's feathers.
Milton Friedman was becoming the most articulate spokesman for the so-called Chicago School of Economics.
The Chicago School meant was a strong belief in minimal government and an emphasis on free market as a way to control the economy.
A minister in the defeated government, Keith Joseph may have been an unworldly intellectual, but his search for fresh answers would change the way not only Britain, but the world thought about economics and society.
Keith wore a hair shirt. He beat his breast and said we were to blame. We've got it wrong. And he did beat his breast. He was called the Mad Monk.
I thought I was a conservative. But all the time I was in favor of shortcuts to utopia. I was in favor of the government doing things because I was so impatient for good things to be done.
And when he appeared on television, he had a vein in his head which kept throbbing. And people said, oh, you know, this is a very strange figure indeed, this man.
It's only to be expected.
But nonetheless, he started the rethink of conservative policy.
Keith Joseph's search brought him here, where, with Hayek's encouragement, a group of kindred spirits had set up a think tank called the Institute of Economic Affairs.
The Institute started in 1957, you could say, as a direct result of the Montpellier Society, of the Road to Serfdom, of Hayek's ideas of freedom and competitive enterprise.
Mark Garnett is a biographer of Keith Joseph.
From the middle of 1974, Joseph undertakes a crusade to convert the country to his way of thinking. And what he wants to do is to take the battle to the heart of the enemy camp. And he believed that the universities were infected with socialist thinking.
Because it was a free society in this country,
And he was going right into the lion's den, arguing a case that many people had never heard before.
Joseph felt that it was his duty to fight back on behalf of the free market.
To revive the economy, Joseph preached that Britain needed more risk-taking, which meant more bankrupts and more millionaires, and less equality.
Well, the audience would sort of gasp. They'd never heard anybody challenging the consensus.
Mild inflation seemed a painless way of maintaining full employment, encouraging growth, and expanding the social services. So the result is that we're now more socialist in many ways than any other developed country outside the communist bloc.
He used to be smuggled in the back door. He was genuinely hurt that the students had reacted to this penetrating argument by chucking flour bombs at him.
It was almost a badge of honour that he would come away from these meetings with egg yolk running down his suit.
Keith Joseph's most significant adherent was an up-and-coming conservative politician named Margaret Thatcher. In Parliament and politics, Thatcher's closest friends agree that Keith Joseph's influence on her was crucial.
She relied on him to give her deep intellectual support. There's nothing wrong with intuition. Intuition is reason in a hurry. And Keith just supported and reinforced her intuition at the very moment she needed that support.
Margaret Thatcher had a gut instinct for market economics. Her father had been a grocer, and when she was a girl, she had helped him in the shop. Hard-working and studious, she won a place at Oxford University, where she became interested in student politics. While she was at Oxford, she read Hayek's Road to Serfdom. It made a lasting impression on her. Years later, when she became the first woman to lead the Conservative Party, she once slammed Hayek's book down on a table and announced, "This is what we believe." Chicago school economists had always argued that rigid government regulations were keeping prices high and fueling inflation. Now more people began to wonder if competition could break the inflationary stranglehold.
What is the effect of regulating the airlines? What is the effect of regulating the trucking industry? And what is the effect of regulating the railroad industry?
Move right to the
Very often it raises prices.
This talk. Tell you a bit about
Instead of allowing competition, it suppresses competition.
Number 4 is
in 1962 of Juliet, monitor tower 126, point enter. You got a 43 heavy, or like 32 left at Mike. You turn left, join Bravo, so Mike 2 and Mike will have to move now.
In the airline industry, the host of regulations enacted during the Great Depression were still in force. It was a classic example of regulated capitalism. But deregulation was in the air. Democratic President Jimmy Carter made Kahn head of the Civil Aeronautics Board. Kahn had spent years studying government regulation. Now he had a chance to do something about it.
And when I got to the Civil Aeronautics Board, the biggest division under me was the Division of Enforcement. In effect, FBI agents who would go around and seek out secret discounts and then impose fines. We would discipline them. It was illegal to compete in price. That means it was illegal to compete in the discounts you offer travel agents. So we regulated travel agents' discounts. Internationally, since they couldn't cut rates, they competed by having more and more sumptuous meals. We actually regulated the size of sandwiches.
But 20 years later, the industry was employing 2 times as many people to fly almost 3 times as many passengers.
The industry vastly underestimated the demand for airfare at lower prices. And what's happened is that as the prices went down, demand went up dramatically.
And once they were free to compete, you began to get Super Saver fares and Super Apex fares and potato fares and peanuts fares. And so an explosion of discounting and competition. Well, those were dramatic.
The stage was set for deregulation of the U.S. economy. And now these ideas were about to make their entrance in the very homeland of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Well, 5% no good to nobody, is it?
Do you think you can win this strike?
Yes, I do.
They called it the Winter of Discontent. It seemed as if everyone was on strike.
I think it stinks like all the other damn strikes in this country run by the filthy socialist communist unions.
The garbage men were out. So were the ambulances. And if you died, the gravediggers were out too. With the economy in apparently terminal decline, the people voted for a new conservative government, headed by Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher was elected Prime Minister on the day of my father's birthday. So he sent her this telegram from Freiburg. Thank you for the best present to my 80th birthday that anyone could have given me. And a few days later, she wrote back from 10 Downing Street. Dear Professor Hayek, I'm very proud to have learnt so much from you over the past few years. I am determined that we should succeed. If we do so, your contribution to our ultimate victory will have been immense. Yours sincerely, Margaret Thatcher.
And I'll strive unceasingly to try to fulfill the trust and confidence that the British people have placed in me and the things in which I believe.
Determined, and some said strident, she would revolutionize the economy.
The spirit of enterprise had been sat upon for years by socialism, by too high tax, by too high regulation, by too high public expenditure. The philosophy was nationalization, centralization, control, regulation. Now, this had to end.